Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Oregon, this one will be for you. I spent last weekend down in the Vancouver Camas area doing a few presentations about self-defense laws in Washington State. Had some loyal viewers make the trek across the border from Oregon to stop by and join us. Thank you very much for coming on by. But you also told me about this horrible House bill, which has already passed out of the House, passed out of the Senate, and been signed by your governor, which means it's becoming good law real soon. And a lot of people apparently having a hard time understanding, what does it really do? What are your rights? What are your obligations? What do you need to do to remain compliant with it? We're going to talk about Oregon House Bill 2005. Not a good piece of legislation, Oregon. You probably are getting used to it. So today, let's geek out, let's slow it all down, and we'll talk about how Oregon will continue disarming its citizens this summer. You watch the news, you read the headlines, and you know it for yourself. Your community is less safe than it was just a few years ago. So you decided to purchase your first firearm. But like everything else in your life, you wanted to do this lawfully and responsibly. So you trained and trained and trained. You learned the laws of self-defense and all the tactics necessary to protect yourself and your family. To this day, you continue to train, and you now live by the motto that it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. You are prepared for anything, or so you thought. Who are you going to call when it all hits the fan? Who's going to defend you for defending them? Who's going to stand in your corner when you realize that proof beyond a reasonable doubt means one thing in a high school civics class and something altogether different in the real world? Introducing Right to Bear, self-defense coverage that protects you so that you can protect them. With an attorney-answered hotline, you will always get a confidential conversation with your state's attorney. There are no cap limits for either criminal or civil defense. All forms of self-defense are covered, so from a fist to a firearm, you are protected. And you will have some of the nation's most passionate 2A attorneys defending you. And the peace of mind that you will have knowing that Right to Bear is in your corner, well, that's priceless. Listen, I've been in this industry long enough to know two things with absolute certainty. Good lawyers aren't cheap, and cheap lawyers aren't good. So visit my friends today at protectwithbear.com, and if you use the promo code WGL, you will receive 10% off. Listen, you need to protect yourself so that you can protect them. Visit my good friends at protectwithbear.com. Okay, Oregon, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about House Bill 2005, passed out of the House, passed out of the Senate, signed by your governor, and the effective date of July 13, 2024. So if you want to circle a date, the date that you need to be in compliance with this law, it's going to be July 13, 2024. That is the enactment date. What does this bill do? It does a bunch of things, but I'm going to break it down for you very simply. The first thing it does is it defines what an undetectable firearm is. The second thing it does is it makes undetectable firearms illegal, unlawful to possess, okay? The third thing it does is it defines what an unfinished frame or receiver is, and then it turns around as a fourth component and makes those illegal as well. So that's what it does. And here's the thing. Unlike what we went through in Washington State with House Bill 1705 a couple years ago, where there's this theoretical grandfathering provision based upon the age of the firearm, no such provision like this exists, Oregon, which means you will have to bring your firearms into compliance with these laws by July 13th of this year, or else you face potential criminal prosecution. Okay, first let's start with undetectable firearms. Undetectable firearms, now under Oregon law, is defined as follows. Undetectable firearm means a firearm, A, constructed or produced, including through a three-dimensional printing process entirely of non-metal substances, B, that after removal of grips, stocks, and magazines is not as detectable as a security exemplar by a walk-through metal detector calibrated to detect the security exemplar, or C, that includes a major component that, if subjected to inspection by the types of X-ray machines commonly used at airports, would not generate an image that accurately depicts the shape of the component. So what we're really talking about here is all of our 3D printed items, because if it's not detectable by an X-ray, if it's not detectable by a metal detector, we then have what Oregon law is defining as an undetectable firearm. What is the prohibition moving forward? It's this. A person may not knowingly manufacture or cause to be manufactured within this state, import into this state, or offer for sale, sell, or transfer an undetectable firearm. Which means, Oregon, come this summer, 3D printing of guns will become illegal activity in the state of Oregon. Now, you sit there and you may go, oh, well, I didn't see the word possess in there. That's right. The word possess is not in there for your 3D printed guns, but don't worry, because when we get to the unfinished frames and receivers, we're going to get those covered there as well. Which is a good segue then to talk about unfinished frames and receivers. How will the state of Oregon define those moving forward? Well, they're going to use very similar definitions to what the ATF used in their rule that attempted to regulate 80% lowers. So a frame is going to refer to a handgun, and a receiver is going to be a component of a long gun. Oregon statutory definitions of these items now read as follows. Unfinished frame or receiver means a forging, casting, printing, extrusion, machined body, or similar item that A, is designed to or may readily be completed, assembled, or otherwise converted to function as a frame or receiver, or B, is marketed or sold to the public to be completed, assembled, or otherwise converted to function as a frame or receiver. And so what this means, Oregon, is come July 13th, there will be no such thing as an 80% lower that can be offered for sale in the state of Oregon. Instead, now you will get what we call here at Washington Gun Law 83% lowers, which are still unfinished frames or receivers, but they do have a serial number on them, and that means, of course, you're going to go through a 4473 and a background check and any of the waiting periods or other restrictions that Oregon may have placed on the sale and purchase of firearms. Now, I said earlier, as it relates both to the undetectable firearms, which were theoretically made at home, and untraceable firearms or unfinished frames and receivers, which were made from 80% lowers, the sale, offer for sale, and the possession of that moving forward, Oregon, becomes illegal on July 13th. Those specific statutes read, a person may not knowingly offer for sale, sell, or transfer a firearm unless the firearm has been imprinted with a serial number by a federally licensed firearm manufacturer, importer, dealer, or a gunsmith with a federal firearms license in accordance with federal law. But I also said there was possession too, because there's more to the statute. The statute now also reads, a person may not knowingly possess a firearm unless the firearm has been imprinted with a serial number by a federally licensed firearm manufacturer, importer, or dealer, or a gunsmith with a federal firearms license in accordance with federal law. Which means if you have a firearm that was manufactured from an 80% lower, or you have a firearm which was 3D printed and the frame or receiver is a 3D printed, neither of those will have serial numbers, and the possession of those becomes unlawful effective July 13th unless you get it serialized before that date. Now, of course, remember, once we get it serialized, then there's going to have to be a background check run on you so that you can actually get your own gun back, and you will go through all the restrictions associated therewith. Now, surely some of you are like, but there's got to be some exceptions. Yeah, there are some exceptions to the statute. Here's what doesn't constitute an unfinished frame or receiver. A, antique firearms. B, firearms manufactured prior to October 22nd, 1968. C, firearms rendered permanently inoperable. And then the only other exceptions are those involving FFLs taking possession of these items. And then, as I mentioned, you will no longer be able to buy any 80% lowers in the state of Oregon because the statute clearly now reads, a person may not knowingly import into the state, offer for sale, sell, or transfer an unfinished frame or receiver. Now, for all of these offenses, a first offense starts as a rather serious civil infraction, and then it works its way up through misdemeanors all the way up to felonies, depending on how many of prior offenses you may have accumulated. The House bill, once again, is 2005. The effective date, Oregon, is July 13th of this year. What does it mean for you? It means that if you're going to try to run out and either 3D print a gun or build a gun from an 80% lower, you can do so legally right now. However, come July 13th, that firearm will need to be serialized. If it is not, it will be considered illegal contraband under Oregon law, and you do face potential criminal prosecution. The bottom line is this bill does four things. It defines undetectable firearms, and then it bans it. It defines unfinished frames and receivers, and then it bans them. And that essentially is what House Bill 2005 does. We'll link it up down below so that if you want to geek out on it for yourself, because you don't take our word for it, that's fine. You can do so. If you got any other questions about this, or anything else related to what's left of our Second Amendment rights, you guys should know how to get a hold of Washington Gun Law by now. If you don't, that's okay. That information is also down there in the description box. And then finally, let's everyone remember that part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here, is to know what the law is in every situation, how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching. Stay safe.